You just need to be aware that the truth is not on social media. That's the point. I mean, the truth is not on Facebook. Of course it's not on Facebook. Of course the truth's not on Facebook. It's not on Facebook. It's not on Twitter. It's not that. If you're looking for the truth, that's not where you're going to find it.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. And my guest today is, well, he's one of those people who he might be different things to different people. To me, he is Boff from Johnny English, because I have a child of that age who watches those films. To you, he may be part of the double act Armstrong and Miller, or an author, comedian, performer, actor, all sorts of things. Ben Miller, welcome.
Hello.
How do you think of yourself?
I guess as a storyteller, as somebody who tries to entertain through stories, but also tries to make a connection with stories. I think stories are a great way of trying to process the world and trying to understand the world and trying to understand one another. And I think that's what really motivates me, I think.
And you're now in this great position where you can come at stories from all sorts of different angles, whether as an actor or as a writer or...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, funny enough, the sketches that I used to do with Alexander Armstrong, they were always story-based. They were always based on characters and situations and not really based on jokes, as sketches sometimes are. And I think I was probably part of a wave of comedians like Lee and Herring, The League of Gentlemen, that were kind of using characters really in sketches rather than, premise-based sketches. And so I feel like I've sort of been telling stories from the beginning. I mean, Viz was the first thing I remember reading. I understood how a story could be incredibly funny.
Now, some of our listeners may be young.
So
you may need to explain what Viz
So let me explain what that was. So Viz was a magazine. I mean, it's extraordinary to think this was the case, because magazines magazines of the kind it was weren't even popular at the time. But Viz was essentially a comic book, really based very closely on the kind of comics that I read as a child, like the Beano and the Dandy, but made for adults, and would kind of pastiche and parody the sort of stories that were in the comic books that I'd read, that my generation read as a child. And it became an absolute phenomenon.
Much ruder.
Much, yes, thank you. Yes, I'd forgotten that bit. Funny how that sort of gets painted out. But yeah, was sort of an absolute phenomenon, would be sold on there was always a joke on the front about the price rising every week. So they would always just slightly inch up the price every week and make a joke about it on the cover, now worth even less. And it was a phenomenon, this thing. But basically, the format, which was a character in a story with lots of rude jokes, was one that I think probably a lot of us were inspired by in the early 90s. Yeah.
So you were sort of a child performer?
No, I didn't really get into doing what I'm doing now until I was doing my PhD at university. So I wanted to be a scientist, and I wanted to be an academic physicist, actually, because I've always loved physics. And I studied physics at university and then stayed on to do a PhD. When I was I finished already, done my first year of research, and I suppose I kind of sort of been non-stop all the way through A-levels and university, and I decided I'd like to try something a little bit different. And I auditioned for a play, for a production of Othello that was happening at the university. And
for the first time, never having done anything.
Never having done anything. And I got the part of Cassius in this play. And every time I came on, it's a straight part, Cassius. Cassius is... for anyone who hasn't seen Othello, is basically sort of the fall guy. Iago steals one of Cassius's handkerchiefs and uses it to convince Othello that his wife Desdemona is having an affair with Cassius. And so it's pretty much a straight part. And every time I came on, the audience was sort of falling about laughing, and I was doing my very, very best to be a sort of serious Shakespearean actor. And the harder I tried, the harder everybody laughed. And I remember about halfway through the run of this play, I'm thinking, maybe there's something in this. I've sort of been doing the same ever since. It's like coming on, acting as seriously as I can, and hopefully it's funny. Yeah.
So let's talk about physics a bit then.
Yes.
I mean, because you're a very bad advert for physics, I suppose, because physicists want more physicists.
Well, I want
And
more
you left
physicists
physics.
too. Yeah, no, I'm still very interested in physics.
So what was it about physics?
I think it was the fact that I was really interested in what is all this made of? What is it? What is this universe that we find ourselves in? What's time? What is the world? What is it? What's the best that we know about it? And physics seemed to be, I read a bit of philosophy and I thought that was very interesting, but that kind of philosophy then led me into the natural sciences. And then I thought, well, I want to know as much as I can about what we know. And, as anybody who knows anything about physics, it's remarkably little. But we do know some things, and they're very counterintuitive. We know that this, where we are today, is an accident of size and scale in a universe that is completely hostile to life. Anything bigger or smaller than us, we simply, life wouldn't exist. And life, in a way, is I think, and I don't have any evidence for this, and I'm allowed to just sort of fling ideas around because I'm not a professional scientist, but I think quantum physics, the real weirdness that goes on at the microscopic level, I think that's what life is. It's an everyday-sized manifestation of the weirdness of quantum physics.
Because most people
I didn't
don't
think
know
we'd get to
anything
this
about
point in the
physics.
conversation.
Very quickly,
Yeah.
yes. We're right down to the absolute essence of life then. So, it sounds like you have always been searching for truths.
For meaning,
for
yeah,
answers.
absolutely, for meaning. And I think what I noticed about when I was studying physics myself and studying science myself is I understood it better when it was put in terms of a story. I understood it better. I understood these abstract ideas when you interrogated it to the level that you could understand it as a story. So, this plus this produces this, which has this consequence. Once you could tell it to yourself as a story, you started to understand it more. And what I loved, being a fundamentally lazy person, what I also loved about science do love about science, is that once you've got it, you've got it.
So you don't need to keep learning.
You don't need to keep learning or doing anything else. If you're a scholar of Milton, your job is never over.
I was trying to explain this to a 12-year-old only yesterday.
Yeah, well,
when it comes to maths and physics.
Maths and physics.
That if you learn how to do this, then you then don't have to spend days and days swatting for your exams because you can just do it.
It's an absolute gift. It was a very lucky, lucky piece of circumstance that that's what I ended up doing. Also, in a really, really important way for me, it didn't sort of spoil everything. I haven't read every book, and I'm not, I haven't seen every play, because I come at it sort of almost from a sort of very British amateur way. Having, being a scientist, and I'm just kind of, giving it a whirl.
So has your adult life been a big distraction from what you're really interested in, or have you found what you're really interested in?
No, I know what I am now. I did have a bit of a sort of, some people get, in their midlife crisis, they buy a sports car and, date someone of an inappropriate age. But I wrote science books. I wrote 2 science books, and that's how it happened with me. I suddenly thought I really want to get to grips with science again. And then having done that, I feel like I've returned to the creative arts again and I feel very renewed, I have to say. And part of what I wanted to do is write these books for my children, because having children, I now have a 13-year-old, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, reading so much with them, loving the stories that they're reading and wanting to be a part of that. And also remembering how important it is to read as a child and how important it was for me, and that almost all the good things that have happened in my life have really stemmed from the fact that I had parents as English teachers and I read such a lot when I was a child. And I really wanted to be a part of that and help bring that to my children and other children of their generation.
So the new one, The Boy Who Made the World Disappear.
Yeah.
What's it about?
So basically, my middle son, I'm writing a story for each of my children. My oldest son, Jackson, I wrote a story for him last year called The Night I Met Father Christmas, because he's really into Christmas. And in this story, a boy meets Father Christmas and learns the true story of how he became Father Christmas. So Harrison is a very different kettle of fish. So Harrison has a bit of a temper, and I wanted to really write a story about him in his struggle, really, with his anger, basically. And I had this idea of him going to a birthday party and misbehaving at this birthday party, and instead of a balloon, being given a black hole on a piece of string. So then, of course, anything that makes him cross, he can just put it in the black hole and get rid of it. So in goes, broccoli, school homework, school bully. Finally, he gets to the point where he puts his own parents into the black hole.
I was going to say, mum and dad is
inevitable, kind of
Yeah.
inevitable. And then, of course, he has to start a process to understand black holes so that he can get his parents out again. So I managed to crowbar the science
So have
in there
you
somewhere.
explained black holes? In this book?
I see. Yeah, there's enough in there about. Yeah, I mean, it'll give you I would say it's an amuse bouche as far as black holes are
So
concerned.
what
hopefully-
is the children's explanation of black hole then?
Well, it's just something that once you fall in,
I
you
say
can't get
children
out
so
again.
that I will understand.
Yeah, so a black hole is basically the bit of a black hole that you can see. It's called the event horizon. That's the point of no return. Once you cross that threshold, you can't come back again. You're going to fall into the center of the black hole. And in the case of a black hole that's not spinning, that's important for the plot, you would get squashed into the singularity at the center of the black hole. But it turns out Albert Einstein discovered this sort of loophole where if the black hole is spinning, you might be able to fall into it and fall through a wormhole and come out of another black hole at a different time and place. So I've sort of given away the ending of the book.
in the book.
But
Well, they couldn't die.
presumably
could
the
they?
people watching this aren't going to read it. But yeah, they're going to buy it for their children. But yeah. I've just spoiled it for you. Spoiler alert, you're supposed to say, aren't you?
So are you taking advantage of your knowledge, or are you deliberately trying to impart it?
Well, I think it's both. I love science, and one of the things I love when I write about science is trying to communicate the excitement of science that scientists feel, because so often we miss out on that. I think it's really interesting. If you go to you go to the Science Museum and you have a little wander around, after you've looked at these fabulous space exhibits, you start to look at the people that are there, or I do anyway, and I started to notice that everyone there is like under 10 or sort of over 65. And there's hardly anybody in the middle. And I think one of the things that happens in our culture is we get told that science is dry, that it's not interesting, that it's not for us, it's too technical, don't bother yourself with this. Honestly, this is something that everyone over here is doing and you don't really need to worry about. And I don't feel about science that way myself. I feel like science is something that is owned by all of us and which we all contribute to, and is so interwoven in our lives and is exciting to everyone. You just sometimes have to find a way in, I think.
But why do you think it is the case that when you get to those sort of years, I guess 12, 13, 14, when science is ramping up at school, for so many people, it just switches off? I mean, is it that not enough people have found a good enough way to teach it? Or
I think it's so compounded. Funnily enough, I don't think teaching is the problem. I think the teachers are fantastic, by and large, fantastic. I think there is a problem in that we give so little insight to the exciting bits of science later on, into quantum physics and relativity, up to GCSE. So you basically, it's kind of a sort of housekeeping operation, really. and it's for me, the really, really exciting physics is the quantum physics and the relativity. Also, climate science, obviously, now as well, incredibly fascinating, incredibly interesting, very not well understood, not generally well understood. And for me, it's a combination of, I think there's a problem with the curriculum, and I think there always has been, of postponing the really interesting stuff until degree level,
So you've learned all
which
the
is too
basics.
late to engage the interest of 13 or 14-year-olds. I think that is a problem. I was very lucky in that I'd read, and I was encouraged to read by my father, who was very interested in physics, so I'd already read enough of general relativity and quantum physics to know it was very, very exciting and there were great things ahead. But then at least what you're working towards. When I was growing up, there was the space program, and I think for a long time, space has with SpaceX and Elon Musk and everything else, that's reignited. But there's a long period in between. There's very little happening in terms of international space. People going up and down to the International Space Station, but really wasn't widely seen by a wide audience. So I think,
or what they were doing when they got there.
and I think what's happened, or what they were doing when they got there, quite often yeah, you would really struggle to find that interesting, what was going on the International Space Station, even if you're fascinated by space physics like I am. But then, with the beginning of with the Large Hadron Collider, with the stuff, the joint projects at CERN, Joint International Project at CERN, that things started to sort of change. And I think it's been really interesting how the interest in science has risen in the culture. So for example, Professor Brian Cox with real, proper, hard science documentaries that I can't ever remember seeing that much science in a documentary that was reaching a mass audience when I was growing up. Maybe Jacob Bronowski, but, you'd search hard to find that level of detail and interest and poetry and majesty. We kind of sort of lost all of that. For a period.
Did you say your parents were English teachers?
English teachers, yes, yeah.
So you didn't come from a science background at all. So you were starting from scratch.
Yes, absolutely. But they are. My father particularly was always very interested in physics and science as well. So I kind of got that. I mean, he would also say there can't be two types of brains. There can't be people with science brains and people with arts brains. We've all got the same brains. It's just what we're reading.
And yet we do always divide ourselves.
We make this really arbitrary division, but that's such a recent thing. I mean, it was really interesting. You go back even to sort of Victorian scientists; they are poets. You go back as far as Isaac Newton, and he's doing all kinds of. He's an alchemist and a scientist. I mean, it's a very, very recent idea. This sort of complete, almost a sort of 20th century idea that we separate the two.
So do you apply all of that analysis to what you do in comedy and acting?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So, I mean, as you'll know from the sketch show that we did first on Channel 4 and then on BBC, there was always lots of science in it. One of my favourites that we did on Channel 4 was the Glenn Ross cancer research thing, where you have there's a cancer research group and someone comes in and threatens them that they're not achieving their targets. And here's what they have to discover if they want a set of steak knives. That's one of my favorites. But we always covered a lot of science in the show. But, I find that what I'm trying to do with my children's stories is combine my love of science with fairy stories, because this is a fairy story, essentially. There's a witch character, there's a magic balloon, it's really a fairy story, but hopefully with enough science in there that'll ignite kids' imagination,
And how easy or hard have you found the writing itself?
I've always found writing difficult. I mean, I always reach a terrible sort of jumping off point with everything that I write, where my mind is a complete blank. I think I'm never going to get through it. And I often don't. But no, in all seriousness, I don't find that easy. And I don't really believe these stories of, I read these stories of sort of writers who get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and then they write X many thousand words and then, they go off to the gym and then they come back and write another 8 chapters. I mean, I don't recognize myself or any other writers I know in those stories.
So how does this kind of thing come about then? I mean, is it that you have the idea that I'd like to write a book for each of my children?
Yeah.
And you sell that to a publisher and they go, yeah, because you're Ben Miller, we'd love that. Or...
Oh, no, because I mean, I'd never written a children's book before, so there was no way anybody was going to commission me to write one. So I wrote the book on spec. I wrote the first book on spec, and I had the idea for this one, and then I took that to a publisher. So I said, look, I promise you I can write at least one children's book, and I think I can write another one. So I wrote it first because I thought if I was a publisher, I wouldn't commission me to write a children's story. So I felt I had to sort of prove myself first. Yeah.
And so do you think of yourself, when it comes to writing at least, as a children's author, or is it just that that's what you've done so far and you could go off and do anything else?
Well, I definitely think of myself as a children's author at the moment. Yeah, and I've got quite a few other stories brewing that I'd really, really love to write. This is the thing, isn't it? I think every area of arts I seem to choose, like comedy or children's, it's not really thought of as proper. It's not really thought of as proper stuff, and I quite like that. I quite like working in an area that it's not. I haven't got the TLS breathing down my neck about trying to pass the literary gatekeepers with this story.
Yeah. There's a huge amount in there, and a huge amount.
Yeah, exactly.
From
and I mean, that's the thing that I always connect with, is how important reading was for me as a child. And there's incredible there's fantastic evidence as well that reading still, with all the other ways of learning that children have to hand, still reading is a really important indicator of a child's future academic success and, in fact, life success. So children reading is really, really important. The better stories we can write for them, the more they'll want to read, and the more variety there is for them. Because I found with my own children, one child wanted to pick up spy stories. Another child, liked the Claude book. Someone else, they're all triggered by different things, and there's got to be variety out there for them.
What do you think people should do if they are not as well read as you?
Well, here's a great thing. There are still some fantastic independent children's bookshops, and there are fantastic children's sections in all of our high street bookshops. You just go along, see what they pick out. You can't really go wrong. If they find something that they're interested in and they want to look at, and read it with them. This is the really, really important thing. Try and read that story to them. And by the way, you absolutely have to do the voices. You are not allowed. You're not allowed to sit on the fence. You have to act everything out.
Until what age would you say? Because in my experience, what happens is a lot of children read a lot when they're younger.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they get to senior school and there's a lot of distractions. There's computers, there's video games, there's friends, there's music, there's all those other things. There's less time to read. And yet they haven't lost their love of stories. They've just kind of lost the habit of reading. And trying to get that back is really hard.
This is a huge problem, isn't it? This is a huge issue of our times, and probably you and I and our teenagers and everyone in between is not reading enough. Probably we're all too much. I'm certainly guilty of that. Too much on our screens, and I'm reading all the time. But I'm reading on news feeds and social media, and I'm not spending the time to sit down and properly engage and absorb a story. I'm not making that effort as often as I should. Yeah. Buy your loved one a book for Christmas. What can I say? Yeah. Apparently there's a thing of as a new trend of married couples reading to one another at home instead of it's a sort of with every action comes the equal and opposite reaction. So the fact that everything is so immediate and digital now means that, of course, there's a sizable minority who are sitting at home reading Anna Karenina to one another on the sofa at home. Have you heard of this?
I haven't heard of that, but I find it quite appealing as an idea because box sets.
Exactly, it's almost like it's like the original box set.
Yeah.
It's like the original box set.
And when you get sick, when you run out of new things to watch on Netflix and all the rest of it, or things that aren't just like the last series. Then reading a book to each other. I'm going to suggest that when I go home. That's a good idea. My wife will probably look at me in horror. You mentioned news feeds and all the rest of it. How sort of topical and newsy are you in terms of your
all-consumingly newsy? Yeah, I mean, you have to be. I think to write comedy, and but also to write or to do anything. I think you've got. I don't understand how anybody is engaged in the arts if they're not engaged with current affairs. I mean, that's where your culture is. That is where culture is emerging, and that's where the conversation is happening. And you need to be a part of it. And you need to know what's going on, or I don't know what you're doing.
So, are you openly political?
No, I'm not political. That's different. I don't think my job is to. That's why I'm always very cagey. It's not probably the right word, but I don't feel like it's my place to go talking about what my own political views are. There's two really good reasons for that. And I think, and I'll take the most important one for me is I reserve the right to change my mind. And what I've noticed with people, or what I would be concerned about for myself, is if I was to express my view changes all the time. And if I was to express that and be labeled with this opinion or that opinion, I kind of feel like, well, where's my freedom to determine where I'm at? The second thing is I'm a private person. I like to keep my private opinions and my private life to myself. And I think probably if I could squeeze a third reason in, I'm a comedian at the end of the day. I mean, I'm not a political commentator, and I don't think anybody is interested in or needs to hear what my political opinion is. I'm really, really fascinated by politics, and I follow it really, really closely. And of course, I do have a lot of opinions that I discuss constantly with my friends and family and everything else. And I think I don't despair of these times. Funnily enough, I'm really excited by these times. I think there's really important changes happening socially. And I think they are, particularly in my profession, in acting, there is a huge wave of diversity suddenly in that we had really lost. So for example, I'm the two things that I'm working on at the moment. I've got a show that comes out on ITV next week called Sticks and Stones. Great casting.
Which has got a very diverse cast.
Really diverse cast. I'm doing a show with Shonda Rhimes at the moment. It's set in 1813. Really diverse cast. What it reminds, a hierarchy will always emerge of some sort, but the hierarchy had become too rigid. There wasn't enough movement, and I happened to have come through. I was lucky to come through at a time where, I went to a comprehensive school, but I could go to Cambridge. I could make a career of being in show business and all the rest of it. It felt like that mobility had sort of disappeared, and I'd be working on set with less and less of a variety of actors, and that doesn't actors and people. Well, not just actors; it's everybody. It's the crew. It's the people behind the camera. It's the whole.
So you had noticed
apparatus.
this whole thing that people talked about for years. That all the male actors were from public school and privileged backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And to a certain extent, that's an overstatement, obviously, and a simplification of how things were. But nevertheless, we are living in exciting times.
And so, why has that changed then? And when did it change?
It changed when
because
audiences.
I've still been asking people about it relatively recently. I mean,
but it changed when the people who make the money realised that that's what audiences wanted. I mean, it's that simple. It started with the cinema box office, didn't it? And the cinema box office, although it's not necessarily where all the greatest art is, the greatest screen art is being made anymore. A lot of that's now happening in television. It's a great bellwether because people are paying tickets to see those movies, and the people who are making the movies take a lot of notice about the amount of money that they're making at the box office. And a movie like Black Panther suddenly gets huge figures, then that just opens the gateway to many more movies and TV shows with diverse casts. I mean, I'd love to say it was because they thought it was the right thing to do. I don't know that it necessarily was. I think it was fundamentally about money. So that's something in a way we can all take credit for, because we're all part of that audience that wants to see that. We don't want to watch the same stuff all the time. We don't.
Although you would have watched British film for the last 20 years perhaps and thought we did, because British films seem to be the same thing. The working title model kind of worked, and so that's what kind of British film became, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Working Title made many diverse films as well. I've been in some of them. But the point is, I suppose, that we had a product that had a certain kind of image, and it's just one of the ways that the commercial side of the business works is you make another thing like the thing that just made money. So it's not very inducive to people trying new ways to make money. The system doesn't really encourage that. But now and then something changes the game, and then real change takes place. And I feel that's what we're seeing at the moment.
So if you're working with a lot more black actors now, what difference does that make to you?
The difference it makes to me, on a really basic level, it educates me. It is diverse casts all around. It's people of a much wider varieties of cultures and backgrounds, basically. For example, I was in a show where Death in Paradise, which has a lot of black actors in the cast. I feel uncomfortable actually with the expression black. I mean, I feel like, having spent time in the Caribbean, there's one of the things that I learned is that word doesn't really work. I mean, there's not.
Well, they're just people in the Caribbean.
But you see people of every different. There's people with my skin tone, with afros and blue eyes and ginger freckles. I mean, you don't. It doesn't really exist. I mean, funnily enough, all the words, I found my own vocabulary, the vocabulary that I developed growing up, in a bubble, really, just in the UK, is not really. Once you live in the Caribbean, you realise, and obviously it's not just black people in the Caribbean either. It's like there are many, many different. I mean, there's the indigenous people. There's there are Asian people. There are There's as many different
No, we
cultures as you can
definitely haven't got
possibly
the right
imagine.
words. I mean,
We've not got
I
the right
tend to use
words.
black as a shorthand. And
Yeah.
I've thought, I've often thought myself, I'm quite happy to be called black, even though clearly I'm not. I'm from an Indian origin. Just because if that makes it easy, okay, fine, I'll be black.
Yeah, exactly.
But we definitely haven't got the right words. I mean, people are using people of color a lot more now.
Yeah.
Which perhaps is more inclusive, but it also feels a bit cumbersome to me.
It does feel cumbersome, and also genetically we're identical. There's virtually there's so little difference, and the differences are not those that are apparent on the surface in terms of skin tone and your hair. I mean, it is ridiculous. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. I think what the conversation is about now is about colonialism. I think that's the conversation that's taking place on film sets, because you think, okay, so now we have a diverse cast, but what story are we telling? This is the next level, isn't it? It's like, and we have a diverse cast now, and so we have a whole bunch of amazing actors in this show that we've never seen before. But what story are we telling? And I think that's the next.
Whose story?
Whose story? Yeah. What story? What are we hoping to achieve by telling this story? And I think that's when I tell you this is an exciting time, I think that's what I mean.
Are the people in control still the same old people, or is that changing too? Are you optimistic about that?
I mean, it'd be really hard to point your finger and say this person is at fault or this person does the bad. The people working in the arts are, by and large, liberal, and they want to, they want to make a difference, and they want to change the world, and they're making this art because they want to make the world a better place. That's why they're doing it. This is the shocking thing. I mean, our own DNA, for example, the own molecules that we are made of, that you and I are made of here. We're both sitting here. I still feel like the me I was 10 years ago. I'm assuming you feel like the you were 10 years ago. We are complete, all those atoms, those are not the same atoms. Somehow there's a memory in this structure, and somehow there's an organization, and it goes beyond any individual member of the organization. These things are superstructures, aren't they? That's why they're so hard to fight. That's why it's so hard to do anything about it, is you can't help but be part of the system that you're actually trying to change as well. So when change will eventually come about. And when change does come about, I find that very exciting.
Just in terms of the sort of the molecular system, if you like.
Yeah.
Does that take you to religion? Is that soul? Is that what you're describing as well? Or are you pure science?
I'm not pure. I mean, I am pure science in the sense that, for me, science is an attempt to describe the world around us with mathematics. So it doesn't really enter into religion, really. I mean, I think many scientists are atheists, but many scientists also have religious beliefs. And for me, there's no.
The two aren't mutually
exclusive. I don't see the problem. I mean, I know you can watch YouTube clips for hours of scientists that do see a problem, Richard Dawkins, but I don't have that, and I love watching Richard Dawkins.
He's been here actually,
but I don't have that same fervor towards against religion. I'm not religious myself, but I do regard. I would say I'm spiritual.
You don't think it's stupid to be religious?
I think it's stupid. I think it's great. Enormous respect.
School kind of does.
I think religion has so much. So much to teach us. The holy books of all the great religions have so much to teach us about how to live in a good way. And I mean, I don't see how you can possibly have a problem with that. And I don't see how you see where the conflict is with science either. And science isn't true. For example, Stephen Hawking's theory of radiation, going back to black holes. So he has this theory that black holes radiate. They're not completely black. And this is called Hawking radiation. And it means that over time, a black hole will eventually sort of lose energy and shrink. His formula for that, is that true? I mean, it's a formula that seems to correctly describe so far the observations that we've made. Not that there have been many of Hawking radiation, but is it true? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a different kind of. Surely that's in a different. I mean, I'm not a philosopher. That to me seems to be in a very different realm from who made the universe.
Yeah.
How should I live? I mean, yeah. I don't know.
At the moment, a lot of us are having conversations about, is there such a thing as truth?
Yes.
in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And
great.
where the facts matter, and whether we now live in an age where facts don't matter, truth doesn't matter, and there's no such thing. Everyone has their own. Is that what you're getting at here as well?
Well, here, I just one of the wonderful things about science, the motto of the Royal Society, take no man's word. This is really, really important, is that you need to stand on firm ground. You need to stand on the ground of something that you have taken a skeptical view on and you have convinced yourself of. And I think there's always been the case. There's been so much misinformation. It's just the misinformation is just more available than it used to be. I think it's strange to say, oh, it's because of social media that, it's because of social media that we can't find the truth anymore. Yeah, we can. We know where the truth is. We just need to be aware that the truth is not on social media. That's the point. I mean, the truth is not on Facebook. Of course it's not on Facebook. Of course the truth's not on Facebook. It's not on Facebook. It's not on Twitter. It's not that if you're looking for the truth, that's not where you're going to find it. If there's two men arguing in the pub and they're both drunk and they're both shouting at each other at the bar, and you're expecting to hear the truth, if there's a mob outside with flaming torches wanting to string someone up, that's not where you're going to hear the truth. And that's essentially what Twitter and Facebook are. It's essentially what social media is. It's an amplification. It's a megaphone. That's all it is. You're not going to find the truth. That's not the place to look for it. The Physics Review,
On the other hand, yes, or books. Do you use social media at all? Or
I do, but I use it in a pretty limited way. I'm very wary of it. I'm really, really wary of it. And I pick it up like I would, the first cigarette in a packet. This is an addictive, dangerous world.
Can I just go back then to sort of leaving physics and getting into entertainment or getting into performing?
Yeah.
What was it that you liked? Was it the kick? Or what took you away from this thing that you clearly are passionate about, which is science, and led you into a lifetime of performance?
Well, I've always been really, really fascinated by the truth. So and for me, comedy is about the truth. And when you write a story and you write it from the heart, it's about the truth. And the truth has great power. If you can tell your own story and you can tell your own truth and you can try and get out of the way of the telling of it, whether you're acting or writing or you're making a picture or whatever it is that you're doing, if you can try and start with a blank page and create something that is true to you, you are doing the world a service. That truth can help other people and that truth can help you. And I think that's the common thread for me with science. You're trying to find out, okay, well, what's true about this? If I hack away at this, if I hack away every single little bit that I'm not absolutely sure of, what am I left with? And that can be incredibly instructive. As little as you're left with, it's really, really incredibly powerful and generative of all kinds of other brilliant ideas and technologies and everything else, just by looking for the truth. And it's the same in comedy. Comedy is a skeptical art. That's why romantic comedies are such fun, because romance is a lie and comedy undercuts it constantly. So romantic comedy is romance is a perfect foil for comedy, because comedy is the truth. Comedy is about what it's really like to be in a relationship. It's what we all love about working. So that's why Working Title have been so successful. That's a fantastically potent type of story. That's what I love doing in acting. I love trying to find the truth about a character. I love trying to find when you're working on a story, the bigger arc of the story. What's the truth of this story? What is the thing that we're trying to tell? And I think unless you're connected with that, unless you know, higher purpose is a bit of a grand term to use, but unless you know what your ultimate aim is, the danger is, you can go heading off in the wrong direction, or much worse, you can poison the well. You can make things more difficult for the rest of us, if you don't have a clear intention of what it is that you want to do, and to return to the theme of your podcast, how that will make the world a better place, I think you can quickly come unstuck.
So I suppose I have to then ask you, what is the truth of Boff?
The truth of Boff. Oh, I love Boff.
What is the ultimate truth?
The ultimate truth. The ultimate truth of Boff is service, and that's why he's so funny. Is he desires to serve. He's the most pure expression of the desire to serve another human being. So the reason it's archetypally funny is because the master and servant is a classic comedic archetype that goes right back to commedia dell'arte and probably to the roots of every culture. And it's basically the idea that this two souls and one soul has to do the bidding of the other soul, and their task is just service. So what I love about Boff, and this is where he becomes, for me, really, really funny, is whenever the tendency of Boff is to think that he could do it without Johnny because he's so capable. But the second he's given any responsibility, he absolutely crumbles. He does no leadership skills whatsoever. And that's what I find really, really funny about him. And that's what he teeters on the brink of in those films all the time, is being put in a position of authority which will completely unravel him. And that's the sort of comic engine inside him. So I think his truth is he's a beautiful expression of the desire to serve, and how demeaning that is and how aggrandizing that is in a way. Because the person you serve, you're able to do for them all the things they can't do for themselves. You start to think you're maybe better than them, and then you're suddenly put in a position where you're the master and you can't cope. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I'll look forward to playing that bit to my 12-year-old.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll improve it for him. Yeah.
So look, I mean, everybody here gets to change the world
Yes.
within this conversation. So if you could, how would you?
I would change the world. I would. I'd introduce a communication device. I think part of the problem part of the issue, you can approach the world from the top down or the bottom up, right? So I want to approach it from the lowest level. I just want to improve. I'm going to invent a technology that improves human communication. So when you meet me, you fully know who I am. And when I meet you, I fully know who you are. And then our conversation comes alive in a completely new way. Because I'm not bound by my misconceptions of you, and you're not bound by your misconceptions of me. So it's a communication device. It's a technology. I'm going to invent it. It's
something to replace 100
the
lunches and dinners.
Yeah. It's going to be a chip. Maybe it's something you put in your ear, but it's going to be a communication device. Because I think part of the problem is it's not just that we don't know each other's stories, but we all communicate in such a different way. Some of us, we all have these different modes of communication. That's what's really interesting. Every character that you play, you find that they relate to other characters in a completely different way. And that has given me the idea for this communication device.
Do you think we should all then be more open as people and give away a much more of ourselves?
I think it's about, yes, absolutely. But there's a time and a place. That's why we have this device to download, because it's not always appropriate, is it? It's like
because if I really knew you instantly, I might go, whoop.
When we're in the queue at Boots. But I think, I do think that one of the great things about getting older is you meet more people and you hear more people's stories and you learn more ways about other people see the world, and it changes you, it educates you. And I think it would be nice to fast track that.
Not have to wait a lifetime.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Ben Miller, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And giving us your ways to change the world. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, then please do give us a rating and a review. All of these interviews are viewable on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Our producer today is Rachel Evans. Until next time, bye-bye.